In her recent memoir, Hillary Clinton devoted chapter 20 to the work she did in Gaza as Secretary of State, trying to mediate peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The last time Israel and Hamas fought in Gaza, Israel was threatening a ground invasion, so President Obama sent Secretary Clinton to broker a ceasefire. Clinton writes, "If we tried to broker a ceasefire and failed, as seemed quite likely, it would sap America's prestige and credibility in the region." She did broker a ceasefire, but as we learned this week, it only held for less than 2 years. So what does this latest crisis mean for U.S. diplomacy? Is this a familiar and recurring problem that anyone can fix? I'm joined by Evan McMorris-Santoro, White House reporter for BuzzFeed.com, Basil Smikle, Jr., a political strategist and professor at Columbia University, MSNBC contributor Josh Barro, a domestic correspondent with the New York Times, and Joy Reid, host of MSNBC's The Reid Report. Thank you all for being here. Evan, let me start with you. Answer the question. Can anybody fix this?
It doesn't seem like that's an easy thing. That's the question of the day, right? $64,000 question, I guess. It seems like a very difficult situation, and one that keeps going on and on and on and on and on. I mean, as you mentioned, the politics of it, it's really much on the domestic level. It feels like what we're dealing with now is sort of falling into the same old sort of domestic politics surrounding it, the same sort of foreign politics. It feels like a show on repeat, kind of.
Yeah, almost like a ground. I mean, we've been talking about this when we were discussing this in meetings yesterday. You know, President Clinton, before he left office, one of the last things he tried to work on was, Israeli-Palestinian peace. Jimmy Carter. We can keep going back. I mean, what can be done?
Well, it's a conflict that's been going on for north of 60 years now, right. And so I don't think that we should expect that in this crisis it's going to get fixed. But I think the politics of it are actually somewhat different now than they have usually been over the last 20 years. In that throughout the Middle East and North Africa, there's this sense among the American public that there's very little the U.S. can do that's productive. The polling has shifted a lot toward people being opposed to interventions in various places. And so I think the level of expectation that the U.S. should engage and should get productive results out of engagement is lower than it's ever been. So in terms of domestic political expectations that we should achieve a ceasefire or be able to positively affect the situation, I think the expectations are lower than ever.
Well, not only that, but I think that there's also a dismal sense that the two sides don't even really are not interested necessarily in a ceasefire, that they essentially, I mean, the Israelis, Netanyahu has signaled really, I think, no interest in pursuing a peace process in quite a while. It's been a long time since even the imperative to say we want to have a two-state solution has been on the table. So I think the American expectations are exceptionally low. I think in the region expectations are low. You have all of the rest of the conflagrations taking place in the Middle East. I think the other thing that has changed is that there's a different coverage in this country of the death toll on the Palestinian side. That's something that I have not typically seen, over the course of following this for a very long time. You typically see a focus on Israel, but now you're starting to really see a focus on the civilian death toll on the Palestinian side, which I think for a lot of Palestinians is a refreshing change, although it's incredibly deadly for civilians, particularly in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, I want to switch gears. We got a lot to get to. I want to switch gears and talk about a story I will admit I had really no desire to talk about when the news broke yesterday, but now that it's turned political, I'm all for it. And of course, I'm talking about the big news Friday afternoon that LeBron James is leaving the Miami Heat to go back to his hometown of Cleveland. Well, check this out. This is the image that the Florida Republican Party tweeted out in the wake of that announcement. It says, "What do these two guys have in common? They both ran away." You'll recall that former Governor Charlie Crist left the Republican Party to first become an independent candidate for U.S. Senate. Now he's running for his old job again as governor on the Democratic ticket, and he's expected to face Republican Governor Rick Scott in the general election. So, Basil, I know you wanted to jump in on the other discussion. Do you have anything to say about
this? About switching gears to get LeBron. Actually, it's a pretty interesting tactic, but I find it also interesting that the arrival of LeBron actually could put a wrench into Republican plans for their convention, which I think is sort of a great story with respect to LeBron's return to Cleveland. But the reality of the situation is that I think it's an interesting tactic, but I mean, I don't see the actual power.
Well, you know what's funny about it is that Charlie Crist's actual personal message that he's using in this campaign is one of I have always been this person. I've always been this kind of belief system, and I've left, sort of followed the Republican Party to where it went, and it didn't take me where I wanted to go, and wasn't working out for me, so now I'm coming home to being a Democrat. So I think that certainly Chris would be the person who would try to beat LeBron James in this election.
I just think the jersey burning industry is like so over the top right now, because you had people who were burning LeBron jerseys in Cleveland who are now trying to piece them back together. Now you got people in Miami like, do we burn these? Might he come back? Should we hold on to them? But the best tweet I saw, and there's one of my favorite tweets on it, was people who tweeted that LeBron has left the state that isn't expanding Medicaid and going to the one that did. So maybe it's like the politics are a little different.
What I find so weird about this ad is that basketball players are supposed to do this. People act like they're all like, betrayed when their favorite player leaves. But this is a part of the industry. People change teams all the time. What Charlie Crist is doing is really odd in that he's had this complete overnight political transformation. I know he has this story of how the Republican Party left him, but there's this long list of issue positions where he was on.
He tried to stay in the Republican Party for quite a long time.
But this actually phenomenon in pro basketball, people leaving their teams. Michael Jordan was like, I'm going to beat everybody. I'm not going to go to the next team to win a ring. And I think that's the other issue with the political parties. You stay in it and you try to reform the party from within instead of flipping back and forth.
Magic Johnson didn't go shopping for rings. He stayed in L.A. I mean, that's the whole critique of it. But his going home actually is very sort of sentimental.
Well, we're not staying on this topic. We're now going to move to the next question that we have here is, where have all the Jewish Republicans gone? Well, not to Congress, it seems. If you turn to page A13 of this morning's New York Times, Jason Horowitz has a story on the fallout over exiting Majority Leader Eric Cantor's defeat. Quoting him, decades after a Reagan era that was relatively rich in Jewish representation on the Republican side of both the House and the Senate, Republican Jews are grappling with what it means for a party that casts itself as the protector of Israel to potentially not have a single one of its children in Congress. There are undoubtedly a good deal of Jewish Republicans in Washington and outside of it, but the question is, why can they no longer get to the halls of Congress?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the history of Jewish Republicans, it's generally been very different from Eric Cantor. You've had people like Ben Gilman from New York, Jacob Javits, who was a liberal Republican senator from New York, Warren Rudman from New Hampshire, these sort of centrist figures in the party, because Jews in the United States are an overwhelmingly Democratic constituency, and they also tend to live in parts of the country that lean Democratic. So in order to have a Jewish Republican in today's Republican Party, you need someone like Eric Cantor, who not only is pretty close to the party's broad ideological line, but lives in Richmond, Virginia, an area that does not have a very large Jewish community. So you're kind of looking for a unicorn. For the party to go back to where it was, it would need to be competitive again in places like the suburbs of New York City, places that have substantial Jewish populations where you might find a moderate Republican candidate. But that's just not where the party's playing.
And I also don't think that the policies that are being put forth from the ones that are there, even for the non-Jewish Democrats that are there, are necessarily not in line with a Jewish Republican member of Congress.
And you're also seeing, I mean, there was a contingent of Jewish Republicans called the that were concentrated among neoconservatives, and that wing of the party is so descendant at this point that the influence of that wing of the party, I think, even has waned. So I think that's where, I mean, at least a substantial number in the modern era, because these were former Democrats for the most part, but who were hawkish on that particular policy, that wing of the party is not exactly running things at the moment.
Yeah, no, they're not. On the other side of this break, we're going to tackle the most talked about story of the week, and it's a sexy one.